The station security director arrived at checkpoint 7 just as the human was pulling the 23rd item from his pockets, and the crowd parted before him like water flowing around a stone. Director Morath was a Kelzari, a species that resembled what the humans apparently called bears. Massive and covered in thick brown fur with claws that could tear through metal and teeth that had evolved to crush bone. But despite his fearsome appearance, Morath was known throughout the station as a thoughtful and patient leader who preferred to understand problems before solving them. And he approached the checkpoint with curiosity rather than alarm. "Report," he said to Tezik, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Tezik's skin flashed through 17 different colors in rapid succession before settling on the pale gray of complete bewilderment. "The human is surrendering his weapons as requested," Tezik said, "but there are many more than we anticipated." Morath looked at the containment bin, now accompanied by a second bin that was already half full, and then at the human who stood patiently, emptying his pockets with the calm efficiency of someone performing a routine task. "I see," Morath said, and unlike Tezik, he did not seem surprised or concerned, only thoughtful. "You have encountered humans before?" Ambassador Yelik asked from the crowd, her recording device still capturing everything. Morath nodded slowly, his massive head moving with deliberate care. "I served on a joint patrol vessel with a human crew member many years ago," he said. "I learned much about their species during that time." The human had pulled out a small set of metal tools from his pocket and was explaining them to the increasingly overwhelmed Tezik. "Lockpicks," he said, "for opening doors when the power fails or when I lose my keycard. Is that not illegal?" Tezik asked weakly. "It is a hobby," the human said with a slight smile, "and very useful in emergencies." The lockpicks went into the second bin, followed by a bundle of plastic strips that the human called zip ties, useful for binding things together, or apparently for restraining individuals if necessary. "Director Morath," Ambassador Yelik said, stepping closer to the massive Kelzari, "can you explain why humans carry so many items? Your experience with them might provide valuable insight for my research." Morath was quiet for a long moment, watching as the human added a dust mask and a pair of work gloves to the growing pile. "Their planet tries to kill them," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight of genuine respect. "Constantly, relentlessly, in ways that most species cannot imagine." He gestured toward the human with one massive paw. "Their world has extreme temperatures that shift without warning. Storms that spawn winds strong enough to destroy buildings. Ground that shakes and splits open. Waves of water tall enough to swallow cities." The crowd listened in horrified fascination as Morath continued. "Their planet is home to countless predators that view humans as food. Diseases that spread invisibly through the air. Plants that poison anyone who touches them. Insects that carry death in their tiny bodies." The human had pulled out a small folding saw and was explaining to Tezik how it could cut through wood, or bone, or thin metal in emergency situations. Even their own bodies betray them. Morath said, "They can die from eating the wrong food or drinking unsafe water, from getting too hot or too cold, from bleeding or infection, or simply from their hearts deciding to stop beating." Ambassador Yelik's fur had flattened against her body in an instinctive fear response. And she was not alone. Many in the crowd were displaying similar signs of distress as they listened to the Kelzari describe the horrors of the human homeworld. And yet they survived. Morath said, "Not through superior strength or speed or natural weapons, but through preparation and adaptation and an absolute refusal to accept death as inevitable." He looked at the bins full of human survival equipment with something approaching admiration. "Every item in those containers represents a lesson learned through suffering," he said. "Generations of humans who died because they did not have a fire starter or a water filter or a simple bandage, and their descendants who vowed to never make the same mistake." The human had finished with his upper body pockets and was now beginning on his cargo pants. pulling out an emergency poncho that folded down to the size of a small packet. "They carry weight, so they do not carry regret," he said, and several aliens in the crowd repeated the phrase softly to themselves, finding wisdom in the simple words ambassador. Yelik watched as more items emerged from the humans' pockets. Salt packets for preserving food or treating certain medical conditions. Pain medication, allergy medication, antacids for digestive problems. Caffeine pills for staying alert. "This is not paranoia," she said slowly, understanding dawning in her scholarly mind. "This is love," Morith nodded, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Every item is a promise," he said. "A promise to return home to someone who is waiting. A commitment to survive whatever the universe throws at them so they can see their family again." The human paused in his emptying to look up at the crowd that had gathered around him. And for the first time, he seemed to notice the size of the audience that was watching his every move. "Is there a problem?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "No problem," Director Morris said, stepping forward to stand beside Tezik. "Please continue." "We are simply learning." The human shrugged and reached into another pocket, and the items kept coming, each one a small piece of evidence in the case for human survival instinct. Davrelian child tugged on their parent's arm and asked in a small voice why the human expected so many bad things to happen. The parent had no answer to give, but Director Morith heard the question and responded, his voice gentle despite its deep rumble. "He does not expect bad things to happen," the Kelzari said. "He simply refuses to be unprepared if they do." And as the crowd watched the human continue his methodical emptying of pockets, many of them began to wonder if perhaps they should start carrying a few more items in their own pockets, just in case. "Surrender your weapons," security said. The human emptied 47 pockets. The galactic trade hub, known as Volantis Prime, floated in the darkness between 3 star systems, a massive spinning wheel of metal and light that served as neutral ground for thousands of species who wished to conduct business without the complications of war or politics or old grudges that stretched back centuries. Park Junho stood in line at the security checkpoint, his small travel bag over one shoulder, watching the aliens ahead of him pass through the scanners with ease and continue on their way to whatever meetings or trades or negotiations awaited them on the other side. He had been working as Earth's commercial attaché for nearly 5 years now, traveling from station to station, negotiating trade agreements for resources that humanity desperately needed as they expanded into the galaxy. And he had grown used to the stares and whispers that followed him wherever he went. Humans were still new to the galactic community, still mysterious, still the subject of countless rumors and exaggerated stories that painted them as everything from unstoppable warriors to unpredictable savages who had clawed their way off a death world through sheer stubborn refusal to. Junho found most of these stories amusing, though he understood where they came from, because Earth was indeed a harsh world by galactic standards, a planet of extreme temperatures and violent weather and predators that had shaped humanity into something the other species found both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The line moved forward, and Junho shuffled along with it, pulling out his identification chip and preparing to present it to the security officers who waited at the checkpoint. Ahead, the security station was staffed by relics, tall and thin beings with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors based on their emotional state, a species known throughout the galaxy for their obsessive attention to order and protocol and their absolute dedication to maintaining security on whatever station or ship or facility they were assigned to protect. The head security officer was named Tezik, and he had processed thousands of travelers through this checkpoint over the years, beings of every shape and size and species, and he prided himself on his ability to assess threats quickly and efficiently. But as the human stepped up to the scanner, and placed his bag on the conveyor belt. Tezik felt something he rarely experienced in his professional life: uncertainty. He had never processed a human before. The scanner hummed as it analyzed the bag. And for a moment everything seemed normal, the lights blinking green as the system cataloged the contents. Nothing more dangerous than clothing and personal hygiene, items and a tablet computer. But then the human stepped through the body scanner and everything changed. Alarms began screaming across every frequency. Red lights flashing, warning messages scrolling across multiple screens so fast that Tezik could barely read them before new ones replaced them. The scanner was detecting metal. Lots of metal, hidden in pockets and pouches and compartments all across the human's body. And the threat assessment algorithms were struggling to categorize what they were finding. Other travelers in line began backing away, their various forms of expressing fear and alarm, creating a symphony of sounds and colors and chemical signals that filled the checkpoint area. Tezik raised all four of his hands in the universal gesture for stop and stepped forward, his skin shifting to the deep blue of professional concern as he addressed the human. "Please remain still," he said, his translator rendering his words into the human's language. "Our scanners have detected numerous metallic objects on your person, and I must ask you to surrender your weapons before proceeding." The human, to Tezik's surprise, did not seem alarmed or defensive or hostile. Instead, he simply looked confused, tilting his head slightly to one side as he processed the request. And then he asked a question that Tezik had never heard from any traveler in all his years of service. "Which ones?" Tezik's skin flickered through several colors before settling on the pale yellow of uncertainty. And he found himself at a loss for words, because in his experience, when you asked someone to surrender their weapons, they either did so or they refused. But they did not ask for clarification, as if the question itself was somehow unclear. All of them. Tezik finally managed to say, "Every weapon you're carrying must be surrendered for the duration of your stay on this station." The human nodded slowly, and Tezik watched as he began patting his pockets, seemingly counting something, his lips moving silently as he conducted some internal calculation behind him. The crowd continued to grow as more travelers arrived and found themselves unable to proceed. And Tezik was acutely aware of the eyes upon him, the expectation that he would handle this situation with the efficiency and professionalism that the relic species was famous for. "I understand," the human said finally, "but I should warn you, this is going to take a while." Tezik produced a containment bin from beneath his station, a large metal box designed to hold confiscated items until they could be returned to their owners upon departure. And he placed it on the counter between them. "Take all the time you need," he said, though his skin was already shifting to the orange of impatience. "But every item must be accounted for and logged." The human reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folding knife, placing it gently in the bin with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly where every item on his body was located at all times. "One," he said quietly, the station security eye, which had been monitoring the situation with growing concern, officially logged the interaction as a potential threat event and began recording everything for later analysis. Tezik looked at the single knife in the bin, then at the human who stood before him with 46 more pockets to empty, and he realized that this was going to be the longest security check of his entire career behind him. Other security officers gathered to watch, their curiosity overcoming their training, because none of them had ever seen anything like this before. And in the line behind the human, a small Morvani diplomat named Ambassador Yelik pulled out a recording device and began documenting what was happening, because she recognized that she was witnessing something that the xenological community would want to study for years to come. Human reached into his second pocket and pulled out a multi-tool, adding it to the bin, too, he said, and so it began. The crowd at the security checkpoint had tripled in size by the time the human reached into his fifth pocket, and Tezic's skin had settled into a permanent shade of confused purple that he could not seem to shake no matter how hard he tried to project professional calm. "Lighter," the human announced, placing a small metal cylinder into the containment bin that was already beginning to look crowded. "For making fire? Fire?" One of the junior security officers whispered from behind Tezic. "He carries a device for creating fire on his person at all times." Tezic did not answer because he had no answer to give, and the human was already reaching into his sixth pocket to produce a length of woven cord wrapped around his wrist like a bracelet paracord. The human explained when he saw Tezic's questioning look. "Very strong rope, can hold about 250 kilograms of weight. Useful for climbing or building shelter or tying things together." The bracelet went into the bin and the human moved on without pause, his hands finding the next pocket with practiced ease. "Emergency whistle. For signaling if I get lost or trapped somewhere and need to attract attention." The whistle joined the growing pile. "Compass. For navigation when electronic systems fail." Into the bin, fishing line and hooks. "In case I need to find food near water." Tezic's skin flickered rapidly through several colors as he struggled to understand what he was witnessing. And behind him, the crowd continued to grow as word spread through the station that something unprecedented was happening at Checkpoint 7. Ambassador Yelik had pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her recording device held high to capture every moment, her small furry face alight with the joy of discovery that only a true scholar could feel. "Water purification tablets." The human continued, adding a small packet to the bin. "Our bodies require very specific water to survive, and most water sources in the galaxy would make us sick or kill us without treatment. You expect the water on this station to be dangerous?" Tezic asked, genuinely curious despite his growing concern. The human shrugged. A gesture that Tezic had learned was a human expression of uncertainty or acceptance, or both at the same time. "I do not expect it," the human said, "but I prepare for it." Because expectation and preparation are different things. He reached into another pocket and pulled out what looked like a metal rod with a rough surface along one side. "Fire starter," he explained. "A backup for the lighter, in case the lighter fails or runs out of fuel." "You carry 2 devices for creating fire?" Tezic asked. "3, actually," the human said, reaching into yet another pocket and producing a small box of matches. "But these are less reliable, so they serve as the backup to the backup." The matches went into the bin, and the human continued his methodical emptying of pockets, each item accompanied by a calm explanation that somehow made everything more confusing rather than less signal. "Mirror for reflecting light to attract rescue from great distances." A roll of what the human called space tape, which he claimed could repair almost anything temporarily. And emergency blanket made of thin reflective material that could retain body heat in cold environments. 3 protein bars for emergency nutrition, a small flashlight, and then a second smaller flashlight that he referred to as the backup light batteries for both flashlights. A first aid kit containing bandages and antiseptic and painkillers, and other medical supplies, a tourniquet for stopping severe bleeding, and emergency sewing kit for repairing damaged clothing or closing wounds, a razor blade wrapped in protective covering for cutting when his knives were not available. As Ix stared at the collection of items that now filled the containment bin nearly to overflowing, and his skin had given up trying to express any single emotion, instead cycling through colors in a display that would have been beautiful if it were not so clearly a sign of profound psychological distress. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, the question escaping from him before he could stop it. The human paused in his emptying to look at Tezic with an expression that seemed almost surprised. as if the question itself was strange to him. Why what? Why do you carry all of this? Tezik asked, gesturing at the bin with all four of his arms. You are attending a trade negotiation on a civilized station with medical facilities and food services and emergency response teams. Why would you need any of these items? The human was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer, touched with something that Tezik's translator identified as nostalgia. My grandfather taught me, he said. When I was young, we would go hiking in the mountains of Korea, the land where my family comes from on Earth, and he would always make me carry supplies in my pockets. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another item, a small notebook and pen, adding them to the bin as he continued speaking. He would say to me, nature does not negotiate. Junho, it does not care about your plans or your expectations or your hopes for how the day will go. And so you must prepare for everything or you will suffer when things go wrong. Ambassador Yelik leaned forward, a recording device capturing every word. Her scholarly mind already composing the paper she would write about this moment. And things went wrong? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity. The human smiled, an expression that showed his teeth in a way that made several species in the crowd instinctively step backward. Things always go wrong eventually, he said. That is why we prepare. He looked down at his legs, still covered in the cargo pants that featured numerous pockets running from waist to ankle, and then back up at Tezik. We have not even started on the legs yet. He said. Tezik looked at the overflowing containment bin, then at the human's pants with their many bulging pockets, and felt something he had never experienced before in his career as a security officer. He felt unprepared, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he began to wonder if perhaps the humans were onto something with their obsessive need to carry supplies for every possible disaster, because looking at that bin full of survival equipment, Tezik realized that if something did go wrong on this station, this human would survive it, and Tezik was not so certain about himself. The 42nd item was a pair of sunglasses, which the human explained were necessary because his species had evolved under a single star and their eyes were sensitive to bright light. The 43rd item was a pair of reading glasses, because apparently human vision degraded with age in ways that required external correction. The 44th item was a small cloth for cleaning the lenses of both pairs of glasses, because smudged lenses were apparently a significant inconvenience to the human visual. Experienced Tezik had stopped trying to understand the logic behind each item and had instead resigned himself to simply cataloging them, his four hands moving automatically as he logged each new addition to the now 3 containment bins that sat on the counter between him and the human. The 45th item was a spare battery for the human's communication device, because apparently the power cells in their technology were unreliable and prone to depleting at inconvenient moments. The 46th item was a charging cable for the same device, in case the human found a power source but lacked the means to connect to it. The 47th item was a pair of earbuds for private audio, which the human admitted was less about survival and more about personal preference, but which he carried nonetheless because long journeys were boring without music. And then the human reached into his final pocket, the last unexplored space in his elaborate system of compartments and pouches, and what he pulled out was not a tool or a device or any piece of survival equipment. It was a photograph, small and worn at the edges, printed on physical paper rather than displayed on a screen. The photograph showed a family gathered together in front of a modest house with mountains rising in the background. The human held it carefully, his fingers gentle on the edges, and for a moment his calm professional demeanor cracked to reveal something raw and vulnerable beneath. What is that? Tezik asked, his voice softer than it had been throughout the entire process. My family, the human said. My wife and my 2 daughters, my mother and father. My sister and her husband and their son. He turned the photograph so that Tezik could see it. And the security officer found himself looking at a group of humans who were all smiling at the camera. Their arms around each other in casual embrace. Why do you carry it? Tezik asked. You have electronic devices that could store thousands of such images. The human looked at the photograph for a long moment before answering. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something profound. Because everything else keeps my body alive, he said. But this keeps me wanting to stay alive. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the whispered conversations and shuffling movements that had provided constant background noise throughout the process coming to a complete stop. Ambassador Yilik lowered her recording device, suddenly feeling that she was intruding on something private and sacred. Though the human had made no move to hide the photograph from the audience, every tool in those bins serves a purpose. The human continued. The knife cuts, the fire starter creates warmth. The water tablets make dangerous water safe to drink. They are all useful, all practical, all designed to keep me alive in difficult situations. He looked up at the crowd of aliens surrounding him, his eyes moving from face to face as if seeing each of them individually. But survival without purpose is just delayed death, he said. I carry these tools because I want to return to the people in this photograph. I want to see my daughters grow up and my parents grow old. I want to sit with my wife on our porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, where my grandfather taught me to prepare for anything. He placed the photograph gently in the containment bin with all the other items, treating it with the same care he would give to the most precious treasure in the galaxy. That is why I carry 47 pockets worth of equipment, he said, not because I fear death, but because I love life, specifically my life, with those specific people in that specific place. Director Morath made a sound deep in his chest that his species used to express respect and understanding. And Ambassador Yilik found that her eyes were wet with tears she did not remember producing, even Tezik, whose species was not known for emotional displays, felt something shift in his understanding of the creature. Standing before him, this was not a dangerous predator, armed for violence. This was a loving family member armed for survival, and suddenly all those items in the containment bins made perfect sense. The moment of profound connection was shattered by the screaming of emergency alarms that erupted from every speaker on the station. Simultaneously, red lights began flashing throughout the checkpoint area, and the station's AI announced in calm mechanical tones that there had been a hull breach in cargo section 7. Atmosphere was venting, and all personnel should proceed to designated safe zones immediately. The crowd began to panic. Aliens of every species pushing and shoving as they tried to move toward the exits. Their fear overwhelming their civilized behavior. Director Morath roared for order, his massive voice cutting through the chaos. And security officers moved to control the crowd and prevent a stampede. But Tezik noticed that the human was not moving toward the exits. Instead, he was looking at the containment bins full of his confiscated equipment, his expression calculating, his body tense with readiness. The cargo section, the human said. How far from here? 3 levels down. Tezik answered automatically. But the area is being evacuated. Repair crews are responding. How long until they reach the breach? Tezik checked his display, his skin flashing with alarm as he read the information. 20 minutes at best, he said. The section is losing atmosphere faster than predicted. Anyone still inside will die before repairs can be completed. The human looked at Director Morath, then at the bins of equipment, then back at the Kelzari with eyes that held no fear. Only determination. I can help, he said. I can seal the breach temporarily, buy time for the repair crews to arrive. But I need my equipment. Morath stared at the human for a long moment, weighing duty against desperation, protocol against necessity. Then he nodded once. His decision made, "Tezik," he said. "Return his equipment." The human was already moving, grabbing items from the bins with practiced efficiency. Each piece finding its proper pocket, as if it had never left. "All of it?" Tezik asked, his hands hesitating over the containment bins. The human reached in and grabbed the photograph, tucking it carefully into the pocket closest to his heart. "All of it," he confirmed, and then he was running toward the emergency. 47 pockets full of everything he needed to survive. And everything he needed to want to survive. The crowd parted before him like he was a force of nature, because in that moment, he was. The cargo section was chaos when Park Junho arrived. Emergency lights, casting everything in harsh red shadows as the remaining atmosphere screamed through the breach in the outer hull. 3 workers were trapped in a storage compartment near the breach, their desperate calls for help crackling through the failing communication system, their voices growing weaker as the oxygen in their section depleted. The station's repair crews were still 15 minutes away, fighting through jammed doors and malfunctioning lifts. And everyone who understood the situation knew that 15 minutes was too long. But Junho did not waste time calculating odds or mourning the inevitable. He pulled the emergency poncho from his pocket and wrapped it around his face as a makeshift breathing filter, protecting his lungs from the dust and debris that swirled through the failing section. His flashlight cut through the darkness as he moved toward the breach, the small beam of light steady in his hand despite the chaos around him. The breach itself was smaller than he had expected, a ragged hole about the size of his torso, where a piece of debris had punched through the weakened hull. But small did not mean safe, and the escaping atmosphere created a wind strong enough to knock an unprepared person off their feet. Junho braced himself against a support beam and pulled out his emergency blanket. The thin, reflective material, surprisingly strong despite its delicate appearance. He pressed the blanket against the breach, feeling the terrible cold of space on the other side, trying to pull the heat from his body. And he held it in place while his other hand found the roll of space tape in his pocket. The tape went on in layers, each strip pressed firmly against the blanket and the surrounding hull, creating a seal that was ugly and improvised, but effective. The screaming wind began to fade as the breach closed, the emergency blanket holding despite the pressure differential. And Junho allowed himself a moment of relief before, remembering that there were still workers trapped nearby. He followed the sound of their voices through corridors that were dark and cold and filled with floating debris, using his signal mirror to flash light into compartments as he searched, his voice calling out reassurance to anyone who might hear. The storage compartment was sealed tight, the emergency doors having closed automatically when the breach occurred, and the workers inside were running out of breathable air. Junho could hear them through the door, their breathing labored, their voices fading as their oxygen depleted. The door's electronic controls were dead, the power in this section having failed completely, and there was no way to override the emergency lockdown through normal means. But Junho did not rely on normal means. He pulled out his lockpicks and went to work on the manual release mechanism, his fingers steady despite the cold that was seeping into his bones, his focus absolute as he manipulated the tiny metal tools in the darkness. The lock clicked open after what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, and the door swung wide to reveal 3 aliens huddled together in the corner of the storage compartment. Their species unfamiliar to Junho, but their fear universal. He pulled the protein bars from his pocket and pressed them into their hands, knowing that food would help with the shock. And he gave them the emergency blanket to share for warmth. His first aid kit came out next, treating the cuts and bruises they had sustained when the breach threw them across the room. His hands gentle and sure as he applied bandages and antiseptic. The youngest of the 3, barely more than a child by the standards of their species, looked up at Junho with eyes full of tears, and asked in halting common speech why he had come for them. Because someone was in trouble. Junho said simply, and I had the tools to help. He led them back through the damaged section, his flashlight guiding the way, his paracord creating handholds where the normal supports had failed. His presence a calm center in the storm of emergency around them. They met the repair crews halfway. The professional responders taking over with their proper equipment and training, and Junho stepped back to let them work. His part in the rescue complete, Director Morath found him sitting against a wall in a corridor that had somehow escaped damage, exhausted and covered in sealant and space dust. His 47 pockets significantly lighter than they had been when he arrived. You saved those workers, Morris said, lowering his massive body to sit beside the human. The breach would have killed them before we arrived. Junho shrugged. The gesture automatic despite his fatigue. I had the tools, he said. It seemed wrong not to use them. Marth was quiet for a moment, considering the simple logic of the statement. The profound ethics hidden in the humble words. You are an unusual species, he said finally. Junho laughed. A tired sound but genuine, and he shook his head slowly. We're just prepared, he said. That is all. When the station had been stabilized and the damaged section sealed for proper repair, Junho made his way back to the security checkpoint where Tezik was waiting with his equipment bins, but the bins were empty. Your items have been returned to you already, Tezik said, his skin a calm blue that Junho had not seen on the relic before. I took the liberty of restocking your protein bars and replacing your emergency blanket from our own supplies. Junho felt his pockets and found that everything was indeed in place. Each item returned to its proper location, as if it had never been removed. Thank you, he said. Tezik hesitated, his four hands fidgeting with unusual uncertainty. Before he spoke again, I have processed thousands of travelers through this checkpoint, he said, and I have always believed that carrying weapons was a sign of aggression, a preparation for violence. He paused, his skin shifting through colors that seemed to represent deep thought. But you have taught me that preparation is not the same as aggression, he continued. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can carry is hope. Junho smiled and extended his hand in the human gesture of respect and farewell. Tezik took it with one of his four hands. The grip awkward but sincere Ambassador Yelik's report was published 3 weeks later, distributed to every academic institution and government archive in the galactic community, and it became one of the most widely read xenological papers in history. The title was simple: The Prepared Species, Understanding Human Redundancy Psychology. But it was the final line that everyone remembered. The words that were quoted and repeated and eventually carved into the entrance of the first human embassy to be constructed on an alien world. They do not carry weapons, the report concluded. They carry hope in 47 pockets, and on that same day, Park Junho finally arrived at his trade negotiation, 4 hours late and still wearing the stains of his rescue mission. His clothes torn and his face tired, but his pockets once again full. The alien delegates stared at him in silence, having heard the stories of what had happened at the checkpoint and in the cargo section. Their perception of humanity forever changed by the actions of one prepared man. Junho straightened his damaged jacket, pulled out his notebook and pen, and smiled the confident smile of someone who was ready for anything. Sorry I'm late, he said. There was a small emergency on the way, but I am here now. So shall we begin? The negotiations went very well. They usually did. When everyone at the table understood that the human across from them was not someone who gave up easily, and when the agreement was signed and the deal was done, Junho reached into his pocket and touched the photograph of his family, reminding himself why he had come so far from home. Then he began the long journey back to them. His 47 pockets full of everything he needed to survive, and everything he needed to want to survive.